The accident happened so suddenly, and with it came a wave of changes that neither Mark nor I were prepared for. I had always thought of myself as the strong one in our relationship. I was the one with the job, the one who organized everything, the one who kept us going when things felt chaotic. But when Mark was injured, something in me snapped. I couldn't handle the change. It wasn't that I didn't care for him, I did. But there was something about seeing him so helpless that stirred a kind of frustration deep within me. It wasn't even about the physical act of helping him. It was about the shift in power that seemed to come with his injury. Mark, who had always been independent and capable, was suddenly the one needing care, and I was the one providing it. It made me feel responsible in a way that made me resent him. At first, I tried to be supportive. I did everything I could to make his recovery easier. I brought him food, made sure his medication was on time, and helped him with the simplest tasks. But it didn't take long for the resentment to creep in. I started to feel trapped, like my life had been put on hold while his injury took center stage. I remember one evening, a few weeks after the accident. We were sitting on the couch in our living room, watching a show that we used to enjoy together. Mark was propped up with pillows, his leg elevated, and I could see the frustration in his eyes. I didn't understand why he was so upset. He was recovering, wasn't he? But as he sat there, quietly, I couldn't help but feel a sharp pang of irritation. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "I'm fine," he muttered, his voice strained. "Just tired of feeling useless." I rolled my eyes, the sarcasm slipping out before I could stop it. "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before you went and hurt yourself." Mark looked at me, his face blank. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of hurt in his eyes, but I quickly dismissed it. After all, he was the one who had gotten himself into this mess. He had the accident. He was the one who needed help. Why was I the one who felt like I was losing myself in the process? As the days passed, my teasing became more frequent. Little jabs here and there, ones that were meant to be playful but quickly grew more biting. I started calling him helpless in front of friends, exaggerating just how much I had to do for him. It became a joke, at least to me. Mark would smile weakly, pretending to laugh along, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. He didn't find it funny, not really. But I did. I couldn't help it. It made me feel powerful, in control. It made me feel like I wasn't the one being burdened, even though I was. I remember the dinner party we hosted a few weeks after the accident. Our friends had come over to check on Mark, to make sure he was doing all right, but I couldn't resist taking a dig at him in front of everyone. "Well, you know, it's like having a grown child at home," I said, casually passing around the salad. "I have to make sure he's fed, get him everything he needs. It's exhausting." The table fell silent for a moment, and I immediately regretted my words. But before I could apologize, Mark shifted in his seat, his face pale, and forced a smile. "It's not that bad," he said, but his voice lacked the usual confidence it once had. Our friends awkwardly laughed, but it wasn't the same. They weren't laughing with us. They were laughing at the situation. And I knew it. That night, when everyone had gone home, the house felt colder than usual. Mark didn't say much, but I could feel the distance between us growing wider with every passing day. It was like the more I mocked him, the more he withdrew into himself. He wasn't the same man he had been before. He wasn't the man I had married, the one who had always been strong, confident, and capable. He was different now, and so was I. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of guilt. But it was quickly overshadowed by a wave of irritation. Was it really so wrong to feel frustrated? To feel like I was drowning in responsibility while Mark got to sit around and recover? The next morning, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, fixing my hair for work. I glanced at Mark, who was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee. I could tell he had something on his mind, but he wasn't saying anything. "Don't forget to take your pills," I said, my voice more clipped than I meant it to be. "I won't," he replied quietly, not looking at me. The silence between us stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I felt a familiar bitterness rising in my chest. Mark wasn't the same, and neither was I. We had both changed, and neither of us seemed to know how to fix it. As I grabbed my bag and headed out the door, I felt the weight of everything that had happened hanging over me. Mark's injury had changed our lives, but it wasn't just the physical injury that had affected us. It was the emotional toll it had taken. And no matter how much I teased or made light of it, I couldn't deny that the cracks in our relationship were starting to show. But I didn't want to admit that. Not yet. Because if I did, it would mean acknowledging that everything I had been doing, mocking him, teasing him, acting like it was all just a joke, wasn't funny anymore. And that scared me more than anything. The months passed, and the tension between Mark and me seemed to grow with every passing day. It was as if we were two strangers living under the same roof, our shared histories slowly slipping through the cracks of our fractured relationship. My teasing, once a source of twisted amusement, had become a source of poison that seeped into every interaction, every glance. I could feel the change, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. At first, I thought it was just a phase. That I was venting frustration in harmless ways. But it didn't take long for me to realize that my behavior was affecting more than just Mark. It was affecting the way our friends and family saw me. I had always been the life of the party, the one who could make everyone laugh with my sharp wit and biting sarcasm. But suddenly, the laughter seemed forced, and the smiles felt hollow. One afternoon, I bumped into Laura, a close friend who had been a constant presence in our lives. She had come to check in on Mark, but when she saw me, her expression shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. I knew her well enough to recognize the change. "How's Mark doing?" she asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "He's fine," I said, a little too quickly. "Still recovering. You know how it is. It's exhausting being his nurse." I could see Laura's eyes narrow slightly, and I immediately regretted my words. But it was too late. I had already said it. "Emma, I know you're going through a lot, but don't you think you're being a little hard on him?" she asked carefully. I froze. "What do you mean?" She hesitated before speaking again, her tone gentle but firm. "I've noticed, you've been making a lot of jokes about Mark's injury. It's not really funny anymore. It's like, you're mocking him." I felt the heat rush to my face. I opened my mouth to protest, but no words came out. How could I explain it? How could I admit that I was frustrated? That I was angry at him for something that wasn't his fault? "I'm not mocking him," I said, my voice more defensive than I intended. "I'm just trying to keep things light. You know how it is, right? Laughter makes everything easier." Laura didn't respond immediately. She just watched me for a moment, her eyes searching, as if trying to gauge whether I was telling the truth. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now. "I get it, Emma. But sometimes, people need more than laughter. They need support. And right now, Mark needs you, more than you realize." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. I wanted to argue, to brush it off, but something in the way she said it made me pause. I didn't want to think about what she was suggesting. I didn't want to acknowledge that I might be doing more harm than good. But deep down, I knew she was right. I had been too focused on myself, on how difficult this all was for me, that I had forgotten that Mark was suffering too. He wasn't just a burden to me, he was a person going through a painful, difficult recovery. And somehow, I had forgotten that. A few days later, I decided to go out for a drink with a few coworkers. I hadn't been out in ages, and the thought of being away from the house, away from Mark's silent disapproval, was a relief. When I walked into the bar, I immediately spotted a few familiar faces, people I hadn't seen in a while, people who used to laugh at my jokes and enjoy my company. But this time, things were different. There was an awkwardness in the air, something that made the usual banter feel forced. As I sat down, I couldn't help but notice the way they all seemed to be avoiding eye contact, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. I tried to brush it off, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. "So, how's Mark?" one of my colleagues asked, her voice a little too casual. "He's fine," I replied quickly. "Still recovering, you know. It's been hard, but we're managing." There was a long pause, and then another coworker spoke up, his voice laced with hesitation. "Emma, I've been meaning to ask. Are you okay? I mean, you've been kind of distant lately. And I've heard some things about how you've been treating Mark." I blinked, my heart racing in my chest. "What do you mean?" He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I've heard you making jokes about him, about how he's useless and all that. People are starting to notice." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. How could they have heard? How could they know what I had said in the privacy of our home? I had always thought that my sarcasm was just a way to cope, just a way to deal with everything. But now, it seemed like it had crossed a line. "I'm not." I wasn't mocking him, I said quickly, but my voice sounded hollow, even to me. "It's just that, well, it's a lot, you know? He's so helpless all the time. I'm just trying to keep my sanity." They all exchanged uncomfortable glances, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I had thought that my teasing was a harmless way to blow off steam. But now I saw that it had affected the way people viewed me. It had changed how they saw me, not as someone who was trying to cope, but as someone who was cruel, someone who had lost sight of what really mattered. As the night went on, I realized that I was no longer the center of attention. The people around me weren't laughing with me anymore. They were avoiding me, and I could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. Later that night, as I walked back to the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. I had always been the one who made everyone laugh, the one who could lighten the mood with a well-timed joke. But now, it felt like I was the one who had become the joke. I had mocked my husband, and now I was the one being mocked. When I got home, Mark was sitting in the living room, staring at the TV. He didn't say anything when I walked in, but I could tell he had been waiting for me. The silence between us was thick and uncomfortable. I wanted to say something, to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Mark didn't look up from the TV. "How was your night?" he asked flatly. "Fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It was fine." And with that, we fell back into the same uneasy silence, two people who no longer knew how to talk to each other. I wanted to tell him that I was sorry, that I hadn't meant to hurt him. But somehow, saying the words felt impossible. The distance between us was too great now, and I wasn't sure how to bridge it. I woke up that morning with a heaviness in my chest. It wasn't the kind of heaviness that could be explained away by a bad night's sleep or the weight of the blankets on my body. It was something deeper, something that had been building for months, and now, it felt like it was all crashing down on me at once. Mark and I were no longer the people we had been before. The distance between us had grown so wide that I didn't know how we could ever close it. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. The woman staring back at me seemed foreign, a stranger who didn't recognize the person she had become. I had teased Mark, humiliated him, and in the process, I had turned into someone I didn't even like. I had made myself feel better by putting him down, but now I was left with the wreckage of what we used to have. It wasn't funny anymore. It wasn't even a defense mechanism. It was just cruelty. The house was silent. Mark was still in bed, recovering as best as he could, but it was clear that he was more than just physically injured. I had wounded him in ways that no bandage could fix. I could see it in the way he moved, the way he avoided my gaze. He had pulled away from me long ago, but now, there was something else there, something that went beyond the injury. He was emotionally bruised, and I was the one who had done it. I didn't know how to fix things. I didn't know how to undo the damage I had caused. The thought of losing him entirely was terrifying, but it was becoming more and more apparent that I was pushing him away faster than I could even realize. He wasn't the same man I had married, but neither was I. We had both changed, and I wasn't sure if we could find our way back. I tried to talk to him, but every time I opened my mouth, I couldn't find the right words. He would nod, say everything was fine, but the distance between us was palpable. It wasn't just the lack of physical closeness, it was the emotional chasm that had opened up between us. I had tried to fill it with sarcasm, with jokes, with teasing. But no matter how many times I made light of his situation, it only made the chasm deeper. That afternoon, I went for a walk to clear my head. The weather was gray, the kind of overcast day that made everything feel heavy, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away from the house for a while. I walked down familiar streets, passing by places I had walked 1,000 times before. But today, everything felt different. The air felt thick, the streets colder. I was walking through a world that no longer made sense to me. When I returned home, Mark was sitting at the kitchen table, his hands resting on his lap. He didn't look up when I entered, and for a moment, I wondered if he even noticed I had come in. The silence between us stretched, unbearable. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I still couldn't find the courage to speak. What could I say? What words could possibly fix what had been broken? Finally, Mark looked up, his eyes tired and dull. "Emma," he said quietly. "I think it's time we talked." I felt my stomach twist. This was it, the moment I had been dreading. The moment when he would finally admit that he couldn't take it anymore, that he was done. My chest tightened, but I nodded, taking a seat across from him. "I've been thinking," Mark began, his voice steady but distant. "About us. About everything that's been happening." I held my breath. This was it. The words I had been avoiding. The truth that I was terrified to hear. "I think we need to take a break," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had expected them, had seen the signs for months, but hearing him say it out loud made it all too real. I had ruined everything, and now it was too late to fix it. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaky. "A break from what?" "A break from each other," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "I can't keep doing this, Emma. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. I'm not the same person I was before, and neither are you. We've changed, and I don't think we can go back." I felt tears well up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I had brought this upon myself. I had pushed him to this point, and now I was the one who had to deal with the consequences. "I never wanted this," I whispered, my voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. I know, Mark said softly. But you did. And I can't keep living like this. I can't keep being the butt of your jokes, Emma. I can't keep being the one you mock to make yourself feel better. I don't deserve that. His words stung, and I felt like I was being torn apart from the inside. I wanted to apologize, to tell him that I was sorry, that I had been wrong. But I couldn't speak. The words were stuck in my throat, suffocating me. I'm sorry, I finally managed, the words feeling hollow and inadequate. I didn't mean to hurt you. I don't know what happened to us. I don't know how to fix this. Mark sighed, his shoulders slumping. I don't think you can fix it, Emma. I think we've reached the end of the road. I sat there, staring at him as the weight of his words settled over me. He was right. There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to fix. Our marriage had been broken long before this conversation, and now it was too late to put it back together. That night, I packed my things. It was a strange feeling, walking through the house that had once been a home, knowing that it would never feel the same again. Mark didn't say anything as I gathered my belongings, and I didn't say anything either. There was nothing left to say. We had reached the end of our story. As I walked out the door, I took one last look at the house, at the life we had built together. And then I closed the door behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I couldn't stay there anymore. I had lost him, and there was no coming back from that. And so, I walked away, carrying with me the weight of my mistakes, and the knowledge that I had destroyed something beautiful, something that I could never get back.